The person who left you did not leave you. They left a version of you that no longer exists. And here is what nobody tells you about avoidant attachment. The moment you stop needing them, something shifts deep inside their psychology, something primal, something they cannot explain or control. Because the avoidant is not running from you, they are running from the version of you that needed them too much. The moment that version disappears, the chase begins. But you are not going to be ready for what happens next unless you understand exactly why this occurs, and more importantly, what you must become before it does. Because if you go back to who you were, you will undo everything. And if you do not understand the psychological mechanism driving their sudden return, you will mistake their pursuit for love, when it is something far more complicated than that. What I am about to walk you through is not a manipulation tactic. This is a deep excavation of human psychology, of self-transformation, of what it truly means to become someone so grounded, so formidable, so fully realized, that even the person who walked away cannot ignore the gravitational pull of who you have become. Stay with me, because this changes everything. The avoidant personality is one of the most misunderstood psychological profiles in all of human relationships. People look at the avoidant and they see coldness, they see indifference, they see someone who does not care, someone who is emotionally unreachable, someone who seems almost inhuman in their ability to detach and walk away without visible pain. But that reading is completely wrong, and your failure to understand what is actually happening inside the avoidant mind is precisely what kept you stuck, kept you chasing, kept you shrinking yourself trying to earn a warmth that seemed perpetually out of reach. The avoidant does not detach because they feel nothing. The avoidant detaches because they feel everything, and they were never given the psychological tools to survive that level of emotional intensity. Somewhere in their early formation, in those critical developmental years when a child learns whether the world is safe, whether closeness leads to comfort or to pain, the avoidant learned a devastating lesson. They learned that needing someone makes you vulnerable. They learned that vulnerability leads to disappointment, and so they built a wall, not out of cruelty but out of survival. That wall became their identity, and by the time you met them, they had been living behind it for so long that they genuinely believed the wall was who they were. Understanding this does not mean you excuse their behavior. It does not mean you return to a dynamic that was slowly eroding your sense of self. What it means is that you stop taking their withdrawal personally, because their withdrawal was never actually about you. It was a reflexive defense mechanism triggered by intimacy itself. The closer you got, the more threatening the connection became. Not because you were too much, but because closeness itself was the threat their nervous system had been trained to fear since childhood. Now here is where it gets psychologically fascinating. The avoidant, despite their fierce independence, despite their insistence that they are fine alone, despite every signal they send that they do not need anyone, the avoidant is quietly and constantly monitoring their emotional environment. They are watching, they are measuring, and what they are measuring, whether they consciously realize it or not, is the emotional temperature of the people around them. Specifically, they are tracking how much you need them, because your need, your emotional dependence, your longing, your visible desire for their closeness, that is the very thing that activates their withdrawal reflex. Here is the brutal truth that most people in relationships with avoidance never fully grasp. Your neediness was not a character flaw, it was a natural human response to inconsistent love. When someone gives you warmth and then pulls it away, your nervous system goes into a state of anxious pursuit. You start working harder for the connection, you start showing up more, you start making yourself smaller, more accommodating, more available, all in the hope that if you can just get the formula right, they will finally let you in fully. But what that behavior actually does, from the avoidance psychological perspective, is confirm their deepest fear. It tells them that closeness leads to suffocation, and so they retreat further. This is the cycle that destroyed your confidence. This is the loop that had you questioning your worth, your attractiveness, your fundamental value as a human being. And I want you to sit with that for a moment, not in self-pity, but in clarity. Because clarity is the first weapon you need to build the new version of yourself that changes everything. You were not broken. You were responding, in an entirely predictable psychological way, to a dynamic that was designed, not maliciously, but structurally, to keep you off balance. The transformation that makes the avoidant chase does not begin with strategy. That is what every shallow self-help resource will tell you. Play hard to get, pull back, manufacture distance. That approach is manipulation dressed up as empowerment, and it fails, always, because it is performed rather than real. The avoidant, who has spent their entire life developing extraordinary sensitivity to emotional authenticity, can feel the difference between someone who has genuinely transformed and someone who is running a script. They can feel it instantly. Performed distance repels them further. Genuine transformation stops them cold. So what does genuine transformation look like? It begins in the darkest place, the moment after the relationship ends, or the moment you finally decide that you are done shrinking. It begins when the pain is so acute that you are forced to make a choice. And the choice is this: you can spend your energy trying to recover what was lost, or you can spend that same energy building something that was never there to begin with. A self so solid, so purposeful, so completely grounded in its own identity and direction that external validation, from an avoidant or anyone else, becomes genuinely unnecessary rather than just theoretically unnecessary. Most people choose the first path. They fixate on the loss. They analyze every conversation, every text message, every moment of distance, searching for the variable they could have changed. They reach out too soon. They perform recovery on social media, posting photographs designed to signal happiness, while internally they are devastated. They do the surface-level work, the gym, the haircut, the new wardrobe, without doing the deep internal excavation that actually changes who you are at a fundamental level. And then they wonder why, when the avoidant sees them again, nothing has shifted in the dynamic. The deep work is terrifying precisely because it has nothing to do with the avoidant. It requires you to turn your full attention away from them and toward yourself. And for someone who has been emotionally organized around another person, that redirection feels almost unbearable. Your mind will resist it. Your mind will tell you that thinking about them is productive, that analyzing the relationship is progress, that staying emotionally available in case they return is somehow responsible. None of that is true. All of that is your nervous system trying to maintain a familiar pattern, because familiarity, even painful familiarity, feels safer than the unknown terrain of genuine self-reconstruction. The genuine transformation begins with a single, unflinching question. Who were you before you needed their approval? Think carefully. Think back to the version of yourself that existed before you became emotionally tangled in their inconsistency. What did you care about? What were you building? What goals had you set aside because the relationship consumed the energy that should have been directed toward your own becoming? That version of you, that pre-entanglement version, is not who you are returning to. You are not going backward. You are using that earlier self as a compass point, a directional marker, to locate the trajectory you abandoned. Because here is what the avoidant eventually encounters when genuine transformation occurs. They remember a person who needed them. They remember someone whose emotional state was visibly affected by their distance. They remember someone who chased, who asked for reassurance, who made the avoidant feel simultaneously powerful and suffocated. And then, in their social media feed, through mutual friends, in a chance encounter, they catch a glimpse of someone who no longer matches that memory. Someone who is moving with purpose, someone who is building something real, someone whose eyes carry a quality that was not there before, a quality that is difficult to name but unmistakable to perceive. It is the quality of a person who has stopped waiting for someone else to complete them. That quality is not performed. That quality cannot be faked. It is the natural emanation of a person who has done the actual, grueling, unglamorous work of self-reconstruction. And to the avoidant, whose entire psychological architecture was built on the premise that closeness is dangerous, that needing someone makes you weak, that emotional independence is the only safe state, encountering a person who genuinely embodies that independence is profoundly destabilizing, because now the formula has changed. Now the thing they always claimed to want, a partner who does not need them, who is whole on their own, who brings fullness rather than emptiness into the connection, is standing right in front of them, and they do not know what to do with that. This is the moment the chase begins, not because you have manipulated them, not because you have played a game, but because you have become something that their psychology is genuinely, involuntarily drawn toward. The irony is devastating and precise. The version of you that they ran from was the version that needed them. The version of you they now pursue is the version that has genuinely stopped needing them. And the deepest, most sobering truth embedded in that irony is this: by the time you have fully become that version of yourself, the question of whether they chase you will matter to you far less than you ever imagined it would. There is a particular kind of silence that follows real transformation, not the silence of someone who has gone quiet out of strategy, not the calculated quiet of someone withholding themselves to provoke a reaction, but the deep, settled silence of a person who has found their own internal frequency and learned to live inside it without apology. That silence is louder than anything you could ever say, and the avoidant, whose entire nervous system is finely tuned to emotional signals, hears it from a distance that would surprise you. You have to understand what you were radiating before. When you were deep inside the anxious avoidant dynamic, when you were in the thick of the confusion and the longing and the desperate hope that today would be the day they finally let you in fully, you were radiating a frequency of incompleteness. Not because you were incomplete as a human being, but because your emotional center of gravity had shifted outside of yourself and landed entirely in another person. Your mood tracked their mood. Your sense of security rose and fell with the temperature of their attention. Your internal world had become a reflection of their external behavior. And that frequency, that quiet, constant signal of emotional dependency, was precisely what kept triggering the avoidance withdrawal reflex. Real transformation interrupts that signal entirely, and the interruption is not subtle. When a person genuinely reclaims their own emotional center of gravity, when they rebuild their sense of self from the inside, rather than borrowing it from the approval of others, something changes in the way they occupy space. They move differently. They speak differently. There is a groundedness in their posture, a directness in their eye contact, a lack of apology in the way they exist that was simply not present before. These are not things a person can consciously manufacture. They are the natural byproducts of doing the real work, and they communicate volumes to everyone in their orbit, including and especially the avoidant, who once defined themselves by their ability to remain untouched. The work itself is not glamorous. Let me be very direct about that, because the self-improvement industry has done tremendous damage by packaging transformation as something that looks beautiful from the outside. The morning routines filmed for social media, the aesthetic journal spreads, the perfectly curated evidence of a person glowing up. Real transformation is ugly in its early stages. It involves sitting with a level of discomfort that most people will do almost anything to avoid. It involves asking yourself questions whose answers are genuinely threatening to the image you have constructed of yourself. It involves confronting the ways in which you contributed to a dynamic that diminished you, not to assign yourself blame, but to locate the precise points where your own patterns intersected with theirs and produced the relationship you experienced. That confrontation is where most people stop, because it is far more comfortable to place the entire weight of the failed dynamic on the avoidance psychology. And yes, their patterns were real, their withdrawal was real, the damage their inconsistency caused to your nervous system was absolutely real. But the moment you locate your own contribution, the over-accommodation, the suppression of your own needs to keep the peace, the willingness to accept breadcrumbs of affection because the alternative felt unbearable, the moment you see that clearly, you gain something extraordinary. You gain agency. You gain the understanding that if your patterns played a role in creating this dynamic, then changing your patterns genuinely changes the dynamic, not as a manipulation, as a reality. The psychological concept at the center of this is what theorists call differentiation of self. It is the capacity to maintain a clear, stable sense of your own identity, your own values, your own emotional responses, while remaining in genuine emotional contact with another person. A highly differentiated person can be deeply connected without being fused. They can care without losing themselves in the caring. They can love without their sense of self becoming contingent on whether that love is returned in exactly the form they hoped for. And here is what makes this so directly relevant to the avoidant dynamic. The avoidant is actually, beneath all their independence, one of the least differentiated people you will encounter. Their fierce self-sufficiency is not genuine autonomy. It is a defense against the terror of fusion. They pull away not because they are strong, but because they do not trust themselves to remain themselves if they get too close to someone who needs them. When you become a genuinely differentiated person, when you develop the capacity to be fully present in a connection without losing your own center, you remove the very thing the avoidant was defending against. You are no longer a threat to their sense of self because you are not looking to merge with them. You are not looking to fill your emptiness with their presence. You are a complete person, standing in your own right, offering connection from a place of fullness rather than hunger. And that precise shift in the nature of what you are offering is what dismantles their defense system in a way that nothing else can. This is why the people who try to make the avoidant chase through withdrawal tactics almost always fail. They are still operating from the same underlying emotional posture. They are still hungry, still incomplete, still emotionally organized around the avoidance response. They have simply changed the behavior on the surface. The avoidant does not respond to the behavior. The avoidant responds to the underlying emotional reality. They are extraordinarily sensitive to what is real beneath what is performed. And when what is beneath the surface is still the same anxious longing wearing the costume of indifference, they feel it immediately and retreat accordingly. Genuine transformation requires you to grieve. This is something that almost no one wants to hear, and it is something that almost everyone tries to skip. The grief is not only for the relationship, it is for the version of yourself that you had to become inside that relationship. The parts of you that you suppressed, the ambitions you put aside, the friendships you allowed to thin out because the relationship consumed your emotional bandwidth, the standards you quietly lowered because maintaining them felt like risking the connection. You have to grieve all of that with full honesty and full feeling, because until you do, those suppressed parts of yourself will continue to pull at you from beneath the surface, sabotaging every attempt at forward movement. Grief, when it is allowed to move through you completely, rather than being managed and controlled and performed at a safe distance, has a remarkable effect on a person. It strips away pretense. It removes the social masks that most people wear, even in their most intimate relationships. It leaves something raw, and then, if you stay with it rather than running from it, something extraordinarily clear. People who have grieved fully, who have not rushed through the pain toward a performed recovery, carry a quality of realness that is immediately perceptible to others. There is no gap between their internal experience and their external presentation, and that alignment, that radical authenticity, is magnetic in a way that is almost impossible to articulate, but completely impossible to ignore. The avoidant, who has spent their entire life managing the gap between what they feel and what they show, who has become expert at presenting a controlled surface while a more turbulent interior remains carefully hidden. The avoidant encounters a person of radical authenticity and experiences something they are entirely unprepared for. They experience the pull of someone who is not playing a game, someone who is not performing, someone who has been to the bottom of their own pain and come back with something real. And that pull activates something in them that their defense system was not built to handle, because their defense system was built to repel need. And what they are encountering now is not need at all. It is fullness. It is wholeness. It is the living proof that the thing they have always claimed they wanted actually exists, and it is standing right in front of them. The version of you that emerges from genuine grief and genuine reconstruction does not look back with bitterness. This is a crucial distinction. Bitterness is grief that has calcified, grief that was never fully processed, that got stuck in the phase of anger and hardened there into a permanent posture. A bitter person is still in relationship with the thing they are bitter about. They are still emotionally organized around it, still defined by it, still spending their internal resources on it. The transformed person has moved through the bitterness and arrived somewhere entirely different. They carry understanding rather than resentment. They carry clarity rather than confusion. And they carry forward a set of standards for how they will be treated that are not negotiable. Not because they are punishing anyone, but because they have done the work of understanding their own worth from the inside. And they are no longer willing to accept a reality that contradicts what they now know to be true about themselves. That is the person the avoidant begins to chase. And the chase, when it comes, will feel nothing like you imagined it would. Something remarkable happens in the human psyche when a person stops organizing their life around the possibility of someone else's return. It is not a dramatic shift. It does not announce itself with fanfare or clarity. It arrives quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the small moments. The morning you wake up and your first thought is not about them. The evening you sit alone and feel the silence as peaceful rather than hollow. The moment you catch yourself laughing fully at something without the immediate shadow of loss following behind it. These small moments are not signs that you have stopped caring. They are signs that you have started returning to yourself. And that return, slow and unglamorous as it is the most powerful thing you can do for your own life and, paradoxically, for the dynamic you thought was permanently broken. The avoidant is not watching your social media posts with the analytical detachment they would like you to believe they possess. The psychology of avoidant attachment does not produce people who successfully stop caring. It produces people who are extraordinarily skilled at convincing themselves and others that they have stopped caring. Beneath the surface of their composed withdrawal, beneath the silence and the distance and the apparent ease with which they moved on, there is a monitoring system running constantly. They track, they notice, they register every signal that reaches them about how you are doing, how you are moving, what your life is becoming in their absence. They will not admit this. Many of them are not even consciously aware of it. But the avoidant who has walked away from a genuine connection does not simply close the file and move forward cleanly. They carry the connection in a compartment they do not often open, and they check it more frequently than their self-image as an independent, self-sufficient person would allow them to acknowledge. This is why the quality of your actual transformation matters so profoundly. Because what reaches them, through mutual connections, through brief encounters, through the digital residue of modern life, is not a performance they can evaluate from a safe analytical distance. It is a living signal about who you are becoming. And the signal that stops an avoidant cold is not the signal of someone who is visibly thriving in a performed strategic way. The signal that genuinely penetrates their carefully constructed detachment is the signal of someone who is deeply, quietly, undeniably building something real. Someone who has purpose that extends far beyond the relationship that ended. Someone whose sense of self is expanding rather than contracting in the aftermath of loss. Purpose is the element that most people underestimate in this entire process. They focus on emotional healing, on attachment theory, on understanding the psychology of the avoidant, all of which is valuable and necessary, but they neglect the single most transformative force available to a human being in a period of reconstruction. Purpose gives you somewhere to direct the enormous amount of psychic energy that was previously consumed by the anxious pursuit of a connection. Purpose takes the raw material of your pain and converts it into forward momentum. Purpose restructures your identity around something that belongs entirely to you, something that cannot be taken away by another person's withdrawal, something that grows stronger rather than weaker when you are alone with it. When a person with genuine purpose encounters someone from their past, including an avoidant who once destabilized them completely, the interaction carries a fundamentally different quality. There is no performance of indifference, because genuine indifference to the outcome is not performance when your life is full of meaning that has nothing to do with that person. There is no carefully managed distance, because distance is the natural result of being genuinely absorbed in the work of building something significant. There is no hidden agenda running beneath the surface of the interaction, because a person oriented around purpose does not need an agenda. They are simply a person who is fully alive in their own direction, and that aliveness is the most compelling thing another human being can witness. The avoidant, whose own sense of self is frequently more fragile than their composed exterior suggests, is particularly susceptible to the pull of genuine purpose in another person. Part of what made them avoidant in the first place was a deep, unresolved uncertainty about their own worth, their own lovability, their own capacity to be in genuine connection without losing themselves. They constructed their independence as a fortress precisely because they were not sure what would be left of them if the fortress came down. And when they encounter a person who has done the work they themselves have avoided, the work of genuine self-construction, of sitting with vulnerability and building something solid from it, they feel something that is equal parts admiration and disturbance. The disturbance is important to understand. The avoidant is not simply attracted to your transformation in a clean, uncomplicated way. The attraction is tangled with a deep discomfort because your transformation holds up a mirror to the work they have not done. Your groundedness illuminates their own unresolved fragility. Your capacity for emotional authenticity throws into relief their own carefully maintained emotional management system. And that discomfort is precisely what generates the chase, because the avoidant, like all human beings, is drawn toward what challenges their existing self-conception, even when that challenge is uncomfortable. Especially when that challenge is uncomfortable. The person who once made you feel like too much, like not enough, like something that needed to be managed and kept at a careful distance, that person does not get to define the ceiling of what you become. The work you have done in the silence, in the grief, in the unglamorous daily discipline of choosing yourself over and over again when every nerve in your body wanted to collapse backward into the familiar, that work is permanent. Nobody can take it from you. Not their return, not their indifference, not the version of you that still remembers how good it felt when they finally let you close. You are not building this new version of yourself to win someone back. You are building it because the life waiting on the other side of your full transformation is so far beyond anything that relationship could have contained that the comparison will eventually make you grateful for the loss. Stop waiting for their return to begin. Stop organizing your becoming around their timeline. The most powerful decision available to you right now in this moment is to become so completely and ferociously yourself that the question of who chases you becomes the least interesting question in your life. Begin, right now. Today is already late enough.